From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome. Our guest today is John Schindler, Observer columnist and former intelligence officer. Welcome, John. Good to have you with us. And on that note, we shall go to our issue 1, the climate.
Every single one of the signatories to the Paris Climate Accord lags behind America in overall emissions reductions. Who would think that is possible? For this reason, in my first year in office, I withdrew the United States from the unfair, ineffective, and very, very expensive Paris Climate Accord.
President Trump says that the Paris Climate Accord, which sets national targets for carbon emissions reductions, doesn't deserve American support. It risks jobs and the economy, Trump says, while failing to reduce emissions from the world's top polluter, China. Democrats disagree, pointing to US government data which shows that June and July 2019 were the hottest global June and July ever recorded. They assert that aggressive government action to reduce carbon emissions is urgently needed.
Pat, in light of those statistics, June and July, the hottest ever in recorded history, should Republicans now be proposing their own Green New Deal?
No, I don't think so. Look, the point about this whole issue is that the elites have been sold on it. The Paris Climate Accord, everybody signed up. Trump is exactly right about the Americans. Carbon emissions are dropping in the United States. The central problem here, Tom, is the people will not accept the sacrifices the elites want to impose upon them to deal with climate change, whether it's getting rid of oil and gas and coal and all the rest of it. As an example of that, what happened in France was perfect. Macron is a great leader in this movement, so he imposes a fuel tax.
Do you think Macron is a great leader?
In this movement, he is, yeah.
Qualification.
There's no doubt about it. He's not a great leader anymore because of what happened. But what happened was the yellow vest came out in the streets of the real people of France, and they said, "What do you think you're doing?" And they had demonstrations and riots in the city of Paris until Macron had to back down. That's where we are right now. The elites believe in it, but the people aren't going to make the sacrifice.
Eleanor.
I can't blame this on the elites. The ordinary people are going to get hit by this. You're smirking already. Climate change is here. People all over, leaders everywhere, mayors, governors, they're all feeling the impact. And they're packaging it in a very different way. It's not a gloom and doom thing. The apocalypse is coming. The various candidates running for president on the Democratic side are making the point that these are the jobs of the future. And the fact that the evidence and the science is there that we are going to doom this planet if we don't act is persuasive, especially among young people who are demanding action. And you've got some very realistic plans from Governor Jay Inslee, who dropped out of the presidential race, but he has presented what could be a governing plan for environmental change, and all the candidates have plans. It is a significant issue. Republicans can't mock the Democrats the way President Bush, the first President Bush, mocked Al Gore as the ozone man. This is a serious problem, and the American people, the world's people, get it.
John, is there an argument here that even if Republicans are skeptical about some of the science, there is the foundation of a Pascal's wager, and if you do not act, the risks are potentially far greater?
Yeah, look, the Department of Defense, the intelligence community know that climate change is real. It is happening. That's not up for debate.
But man-made climate change.
Absolutely. The challenge becomes this. Trump, by the way, gave a hint about his way of pursuing this, which is saying, yeah, but the Chinese are a lot worse. By the way, he's right. And if this gets nested into his broader confrontation with China, that gives Republicans a lot of top cover to say, hey, why are we making these sacrifices when Beijing's a much bigger problem, which is at least has some basis in fact. And the Democrats really do own this issue now, and it could be very pivotal in 2020 if, frankly, they can restrain some of their more apocalyptic tendencies when you have members of the squad coming out saying basically the planet's going to end in 10 years. And this kind of rhetoric really does help Republicans, which is unfortunate because the Republicans, were they smart, would, a la Pascal, say, look, we do have to address this in some way. We can't pretend this is fake anymore. That is a loser. Not clear they're going there yet, though.
Okay, Clarence, what about the idea, though, that John speaks about there that sometimes some members of the Democratic Party perceivably might be going too far? So one idea that had been suggested is the notion that we should stop eating meat or eat a lot less meat. That seems like something a lot of Americans might not get behind. What say you?
Well, the problem that politically is like Pat was talking about elites, as if elites are benefiting from this whole debate and poor folks are benefiting from pollution. Quite the opposite is true. Democrats have to watch out for going too far to the left, toward the progressive end politically, just like Republicans have to watch out for going too far to the right. And I think it's going to be more clear now in this next election. But in questions of whether climate change is real or not, John, you beat me to it as far as the military evidence, as well as I got some great coastal real estate to sell you, Pat. That's now slowly sinking on both coasts.
Let Clarence finish.
And people, watermen I've talked to in the Chesapeake Bay, they see the evidence of climate change, but they don't want to call it that. They say, well, it's just tides.
You contradict yourselves, Clarence. You contradict. Okay, we got 2030. If we don't make it there, all hell is going to break loose. And you say we can't cut out meat. You're right. Why don't you just take these private jets and ground all the private jets folks have and rich people have?
That's a
and
satire,
do that.
Pat. That's not reality.
It's a satire. You say
that's not
this
reality.
is a tremendous disaster we're facing. Right. Oh, but we can't do that.
But
people don't think they're serious.
You don't have to ground all the jets, but you do have to lessen the reliance on coal. And actually, it's an old trope about China that China's the bad guy here. They've made enormous progress. They are really cutting back on coal. They're increasing their investments in sustainable
if you believe
fuel.
Beijing statistics,
there are a lot of people who do believe their statistics, and they're working hard. And 2050 is the recognized date beyond which there really will be significant problems if we can't lower the carbon emissions. Now, Bernie Sanders has a plan that is pie in the sky. He doesn't want to use any nuclear, and with $16 trillion, that is not and nobody really wants to use nuclear anyway. It's not going anywhere.
There's no coal, no gas, no oil, no nuclear.
Yes. And actually, that's where we're heading. We're heading to sustainable fuel.
All right.
Pat.
The elites don't want to put these wind farms
What a worn-out populist argument that is. All you can do is parrot. It's the elites.
We're winning on the ground, I'm afraid.
No,
you're suffocate in the future.
We're all going to die.
The birds are all going to die.
All right. John, let me bring in John. John,
talk to the kids and grandkids.
There is a potentially issue here, though, for Republicans to say, actually, when we talk about specifics, whether it be private jets or the wind farms off Cape Cod, there is a sort of NIMBYism that sometimes comes up from the left. But from the left's point of view, Republicans seem to persist in this idea, blame China and do nothing. What should we do?
Right. Well, we've seen this on display right here. Obviously, blaming China is not a solution to the climate change problem. Although Pat is correct that the optics of superstar celebrities jetting to Davos or wherever to preach about the need to cut down emissions, that's a terrible optic. I mean, let's just be clear about this. Less preaching, more pragmatism. Watch for where this goes. In the 2020 race, where obviously pragmatism is not going to come from the Republican side as long as Trump is the president. But after Trump, who knows? And let's watch.
All right.
Wait.
No, I've got an exit question. I want a yes or no from everyone. Let's start with John. Is Joe Biden right to say that we should stop fracking? Yes or no?
I don't think so. No.
No.
No, for God's
sake.
Eleanor.
I'm not going to take a position on fracking. Biden has a broader plan that is realistic and that actually has a chance of passing.
Clarence.
Should he be elected?
I've seen buildings out in Oklahoma that are all shook up
yes
because
or no?
of fracking.
Are you going to take a position?
I'm in the middle, Virginia.
All right, we're moving on. Issue 2, the military.
We had it was depleted. Now we've rebuilt our military like never before.
Annual U.S. defense spending is approaching $750 billion. The big investments are necessary, say Republicans, in order to rebuild the military from years of underfunding during the Obama administration. Many Democrats, including top 2020 presidential contenders, disagree. They say that the Pentagon should be more efficient and that more money should be invested at home. But with a rising China challenging American interests in the Indo-Pacific and Russia boosting its long-range missile and electronic warfare capabilities, what sum balances taxpayer value for money and national defense?
Eleanor, do we need to spend as much as we are on defense?
Well, the Democrats paid the price of supporting a bigger military budget in the current Congress in order to get the caps lifted on domestic spending. So basically, it's an arms race between domestic spending and military spending, with the Republicans wanting more military and the Democrats and everybody just forgets about the impact on the deficit. No, I don't think we need to spend more money on the military. I don't think we need to spend as much. We need to reorder priorities. We don't need to have a military that fights the wars of the last century. We have to devote more to cyber warfare and the kind of smart techniques and technology of the future. We don't need more aircraft carriers or whatever it is that the president seems to think we need.
Pat?
The problem is look, we only spend 15% of the budget on defense. There's about 1.4 million folks in the armed forces. Well, it used to be under Jack Kennedy and Eisenhower over 50%.
I think it's what, 3.4, right? 3.7.
That's GDP, yeah, but it's 15% of the whole budget.
Yeah.
But the problem is, and Eleanor's right in part, the United States is overextended and overcommitted. At the end of the Cold War, despite the fact we reduced the size of the military, you've doubled the size of NATO in terms of numbers of nations. There's almost 30 nations. You're all over the Middle East in 4 or 5 wars. You got commitments to Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, all over Southwest Asia. When all of these, Southeast Asia, when all of these problems are growing and the Chinese military is growing dramatically, the United States needs to really have a real meeting and decide what it is we have to defend and what we can defend.
So what is your point? Should we spend more or less or the same?
No, I don't think I would spend more military money. I certainly wouldn't enlarge the Navy. I certainly wouldn't enlarge the armed forces at all.
Clarence?
Well, John knows more facts and figures than I do on this, but I know enough that to know that politics drives our military budget more than anything else. Like Eleanor said, that we get into an arms race. Okay, we'll give you so much for your daycare, and then we'll more for our missiles. The question is, what are our actual needs? And when we do stretch our empire, if you will, too far around the planet, then we become required to spend more and more on military, whether we need it or not. And I think we need to we got to get out of that cycle. I don't see that happening in the near future.
John?
Yeah, I'm politically pessimistic about this getting better in the short term. And by the way, no one sensible is going to debate the fact that Pentagon acquisition, Navy shipbuilding are just broken. We could spend money much more efficiently. That's absolutely true. Pat is also correct in a big picture sense that we are facing now a yawning gap between U.S. military capabilities and what we've promised to do around the world. That's real. That is coming into focus. And what is really coming into focus, underlying all of this, is that the U.S. military has now spent almost a generation in open-ended wars of choice in the Middle East. And the cost of it, in addition to lives, obviously, has been block obsolescence in a lot of our conventional warfighting capabilities. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force are now playing massive catch-up because the National Defense Strategy, the new one we have, the National Security Strategy, all say we are preparing again for peer-to-peer competition, which no one has done in the U.S. military in 30 years.
Let me ask John one quick follow-up question here. What should be reallocated from the budget? If you were the president, or you had ultimate power, what would you move around in the existing budget?
Well, first of all, I would massively curtail our commitments to the Middle East to use that money for peer-to-peer competition.
Let him finish.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're exactly right. You're going to look. It's come home, America, from the Middle East. We put $5 or $6 trillion into these insane wars. Secondly, try to make an effort to get along with Putin's Russia and divide Russia and China the way Nixon and Reagan did, and try to make at least tolerable friends of both countries. I mean, the idea that we've pushed Putin, this huge military power, into the arms of China by moving NATO onto his front porch was geopolitical insanity. George Kennan was right.
Who was the Soviet leader when Nixon went to China?
When Nixon went to China, it was Brezhnev. We brought him out to San Clemente.
You talked about 4 or 5 wars in the Middle East. Is Iraq?
You got Yemen, Iraq, you got Libya, Afghanistan.
Yemen.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and you would just
Syria.
witdraw all American troops from every
No,
one
I
of
didn't
those
say that.
places?
I didn't say that.
He mentioned that many conflicts.
But you got
I
very
think,
few.
I think you do
you
need
don't
an
have-
American presence in a lot of places,
But you've
frankly.
only got it, if you take those 5 wars, you probably got fewer than 20,000 American troops.
Clarence, to Eleanor's point here, it is quite striking to see the change in Republican rhetoric from previously, where it was under the Bush administration, can't cut and run from Iraq, whereas now with President Trump very amenable, it seems, to withdrawing forces from Afghanistan, it seems to be Democrats more saying, listen, look what happened up to 9/11, where we allowed a safe haven and we should keep some forces there. Where do you think that sort of shift has come from?
I think, as with health care, Mr. Trump is about to discover it's more complicated than he thought. Nobody wants to stay in Afghanistan, but how do you get out? That's what defines a quagmire, and it's kind of what we're in right now. Afghanistan is still a country that, outside of Kabul, is largely controlled by tribes, tribal leaders. We're trying to do politics with them, do politics with the Taliban, but it's very iffy right now, and there's always that possibility that the Taliban is just going to rise up as soon as we leave.
Well, let's let Eleanor have a quick rejoinder here.
The deal that the administration is making is only with the Taliban. They've cut out the Afghan government, which I don't see how that can work.
There is no way we are ever getting out of Afghanistan without some sort of deal, whatever we want to call it, with Taliban. That's reality.
Would you keep some forces there?
I think we need a small footprint regardless.
But look, I mean, what are we down to 14,000 right now?
Much smaller.
Yeah, 14,000 there. But look, the honest truth is, when we leave, you're going to have the same decent interval we had after Vietnam when we left in 73. 75, it all went to hell in a handbasket. And I feel sorry for the people of Afghanistan, especially the women in those schools and the rest of it, when the United States goes, because I think, looking at it realistically, the Taliban could be right back in power.
Exactly.
Oh, they will be.
That way.
Make no mistake. They will be.
And the administration is helping them, basically.
Well, I think that's way too simplistic.
Well,
Look, we are here because in Afghanistan still the longest war in American history by a long margin for 2 reasons. One of which was mission creep under the George W. Bush administration from the initial success into making Afghanistan not Afghanistan, which wound up being endorsed in 2009 by new President Barack Obama, who wanted to make clear, I can be tough too, but we won't walk away from Iraq. Please note, his Vice President Joe Biden cautioned him not to do this, to go toward a light footprint, counterterrorism only mission in Afghanistan. Joe Biden was right then, and that would be right today.
Concluding comment from Eleanor.
Biden's foreign policy experience has not come to fore yet in the Democratic campaign. There are both positives and negatives, but
All right.
at least he knows something.
Yes, it does.
We're moving on. For my 2 cents, a mistake to leave Afghanistan without a residual footprint. Look at what happened when we withdrew from Iraq in 2011, rise of ISIS, and look at Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan before 9/11. Anyway, issue 3, entitlements.
Nobody's going to mess with this country. And we're going to become rich again, and we're going to become great again. And I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid.
President Trump has lived up to that promise not to cut entitlement spending on programs such as Medicare and Social Security. And that has Democrats and a good number of Republicans happy. But is this fair on younger Americans? After all, the national debt now stands above $22 trillion. And a June report by the Congressional Budget Office found that, factoring in productivity and interest rate changes, U.S. debt as a percentage of GDP will increase from 78% of GDP in 2019 to a staggering 144% of GDP by 2049. The problem, with an aging population, entitlements are set to be the increasingly central drivers of new debt.
Clarence, are older Americans selling out the future of younger Americans to continue feeding at the trough of unaffordable entitlements?
You just watch yourself, young fella.
Yeah.
remember what we did for this country. But seriously, we really have a situation now in which at least you had Republicans used to care about deficits. Now we got a Republican president who doesn't care. They stopped caring too. This is not good in the long run.
So
I
we need
think
reform.
everybody right now is selling out the future.
If you were President Page, would you push for reform?
Well, of course. And everybody speaks well of the need for reform, but actually doing it. You got to, as with taxes, you've got to cut somewhere, and who you're going to cut and how. And we need a serious effort, once again, to examine what we know is already true and act on it. But I don't see it happening very soon.
Would you endorse the Bowles-Simpson plan that came out a few years ago? that
Oh,
matched?
I thought Bowl and Simpson had a great plan, but nobody wanted to pay the hard price
Right.
And
for
how
it.
many
That's the
people
problem.
watching this show remember what the Bowles-Simpson plan was?
We
And
do.
That's why it's
do.
not happening, right?
Oh, okay.
And
You know,
let's be
there's
fair,
one simple
Obama
thing you
pretended
could
he
do
wanted to go away.
is lift the cap. Lift the cap on the payroll tax
There you go.
and let all those people who are making lots of money pay more into
Lift
Social
the cap
Security
on
and
the payroll
Medicare and
tax?
everything.
Yeah,
Eleanor,
Social Security. Yeah.
let me ask Eleanor.
You will send, I mean, if you got a middle class constituency, you raise that cap and raise taxes on the middle class of this country.
Wait,
And the
No, no.
elites, Pat, you want to tax the elites, don't
But
you?
no, the
right
point
now,
is, I think
it's
it's the same
a
too.
progressive
It's the
tax.
same
Eleanor.
thing. Hold it.
I can't recite the number, but I think if you make over 123,000,
that's
about
approximately,
that,
yeah.
there's no more taxes.
Right.
On up to people who are making zillions.
All
So
right, John, what should we
that's
do?
fine.
The model here already exists. It is what Canada did in the mid-1990s under Liberal government, which they're Democrats in effect, which was looking at the numbers. Government spending is clearly unsustainable, and debt service will overwhelm the budget. And they did the hard work of serious entitlement reform that brought things into line for at least the next generation. This can be done, but it requires a bipartisan consensus
requires-
that it has to be done
In
now.
a democratic
it cannot be
country,
kicked down the road
this
any further.
democracy, I don't believe, can do it. Now, you know what Mr. Putin did in Russia. He's got very high
Well, we're not doing
popularity.
that.
He came in, what he did, he raised the retirement age by 5 years for both men and women. It's now 60 for women, 65 for men. He got that done. Anybody that tried to do that in this country, Republican or Democrat, would be right down the tubes, and I'll tell you.
I am not setting Vladimir Putin as the role model
Well,
here.
it shows you what
and
dictators
lifting
can
the
do
cap,
that Democrats can't.
Right. Well,
Thank you.
What a comment that is. All right.
yes. We know that, which is why
We know-
we cherish what's left of our democracy.
Well, I mean, you're not getting it done. The democracy's not getting it done in terms of entitlements, is it?
Well, we'll see. Well,
No,
we'll
it's
see.
not. No, I agree with you there. It's not.
Yeah.
But we do need
What
to do
specifics,
this.
though? Raising age of
Leadership.
I
eligibility
think
for
you
Medicare?
clearly have to raise eligibility. I would go with means testing with certain benefits. It's
Measure of inflation.
Yeah,
Cost of
COLA
living,
benefits need to be looked
cancel
at
the
more
cost
closely.
of living for the well-to-do for
Absolutely.
2 years.
Would you support that then?
I would support it, yeah.
Good.
Okay. Clarence.
Yeah, no, those are all good reforms. Question is, how are we going to get Medicare for all in the middle of all this? Those numbers have to be figured out as well. Politics does go
Medicare
on.
You
for
can-
all is a catchy phrase, but it
Yeah.
is not realistic.
Don't worry about Medicare.
Well,
Just get
it's
rid of the.
delusional. It's delusional that we're talking about
Yeah.
Medicare
Yeah.
for all when we can't sustain the existing system. This is what bothers me about all this. I mean, even
I
Bernie
think the
Sanders,
delusion is
to
going
be
on.
fair, has said, it's going to mean big middle class
The guys
taxes.
that support
At least he says
Medicare
that.
for all and getting rid of private health insurance are going to solve their own problem.
I don't think private health insurance is in danger. That
I don't
again,
think it is
Is
either.
the left stepping out there too far?
Obamacare,
But, no.
Obamacare will live another life. It
Right.
will continue to live.
Well, who here thinks that the possible way in which we would eventually get entitlement reform is when the markets force it, when interest rates go up and we're paying more just to pay down the interest on the debt, and the bond market starts spiking? Is the market going to force action?
Democracies really don't respond well until the wolf is at the door.
Right.
And so, I mean, if there's imminent economic collapse,
Well,
like
you're
we saw in
telling
08 and 09,
you're
which was
looking
a
at-
result of a housing problem, if there's that kind of collapse triggered by
Yeah.
entitlements, then you're going to get some action. But I hope
John
we
and
don't
then
wait
Pat.
till then.
The real problem here is in democracies generally do have a bad track record of applying the brakes only when they can see the cliff edge. The real problem is that as long as the dollar remains the global reserve currency, and there's no signs of that changing anytime soon, we're going to have such a margin for error and the ability to borrow. My macro fear is we're going to kick that can down the road until the can is literally going off the cliff.
Well, I think
and that's what has to be avoided.
That's pretty close to, I think, $1 trillion a year is forecast as the deficit right on through the 2020s. Yep. And the debt is already larger than the whole national economy. Yeah. This will continue for a while. We don't know when it happens, but all of a sudden you're right at the edge of the cliff.
A little history here. Bill Clinton left office with a surplus. George W. blew through it with 2 unpaid wars and prescription drug plan he
And
didn't
Obama
pay
did
for.
what? How did Obama
and
do?
the Democrats put in pay as you go, and the Republicans put Obama in a straitjacket. The deficit came down
doubled
under
the debt.
Obama. Trump has just let it fly
He doubled
loose.
the debt. Obama did.
Obama did.
All right, Clarence.
It keeps doubling.
Clarence.
If he gets 8 years, perhaps, Clarence.
Obama,
All right, let me ask Clarence a
14,
question here.
as he said.
All right, enough. Clarence, do you think there is any potential post 2020, but before 2024, to see some major entitlement reform done, bipartisan sense?
I wish I was more optimistic about it, but I think it's really true. We've seen our system doesn't really respond until we can at least see the cliff, and I don't think enough people see it
Tom,
right
who's
now.
going to do it? I mean, is Trump going to do it, or is Biden? If you think Biden's going to win, the Democrats will come in and start cutting entitlements?
Well,
Right,
what is
right.
interesting,
We're
though,
not
is
talking about cutting entitlements, actually.
Joe Biden actually in 2011 was, I think, the keystone negotiator on behalf of President Obama with to try and get congressional Republicans to
Well, that's
support
right.
some kind of
Well,
entitlement reform.
Biden was one of
Having to do with
the last of the
indexing.
realists here.
Right.
Yeah,
Tom,
exactly.
we did it in the Reagan years.
Okay.
The Greenspan Commission.
All right, so we're going to go to a forced prediction now, and based on what we've talked about today, we'll start off with Patrick. Do you think the Green New Deal will be a benefit or a cost to Democrats in 2020?
Democrats will throw off all the heavy baggage
Benefit
of the
or
green.
cost?
I think it's a cost.
Electoral cost. Eleanor?
Well, depending who the nominee is, I think the Green New Deal will have to be reconfigured.
Modified.
Benefit or cost?
If it's Biden, he's already got a plan out there that's not as expansive as the
Benefit
original
or
Green
cost?
New Deal. The whole climate change issue benefits Democrats.
John?
The Green New Deal will be a serious cost to Democrats in 2020, unless, to riff on Eleanor, Joe Biden is able to triangulate in Clintonian
Very
fashion.
quickly.
I think as the Green New Deal, it'll be a cost, but under another name, another label or labels,
Yeah,
it's
okay.
benefit because people like what's
All
in
right.
it. They just don't like the name of it.
Got to get out. I predict that it'll be a cost. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.